Well, good morning. It's a beautiful day in the neighborhood. Won't you be my neighbor? So, and Louis has made the decision to uproot himself from the womb of Amherst and plunk himself down in Center City, Minnesota. He arrives in late January and it's a frozen tundra. He's kind of like amazed that he would end up in this place. But remember, he's developed a very high level of trust in the guidance that I, as Sun King, am offering him. He doesn't see it yet as Sun King. At the time, he's still using the language of Holy Spirit or Jesus via his immersion into A Course in Miracles. So as soon as he gets established in his little motel room in Center City, just actually in Lindstrom, a few miles down the road from Center City, where Hazelden has its very large complex, biggest healing center in the world. Louis puts up a couple notices to right away get a Course in Miracles group started. There are several, quite a few staff members that were very interested. I remember a woman running the bookstore there, woman running the front desk, an acquisition editor from the publishing company. Yeah, there was a nice group, probably 5 or 6 regulars that would gather weekly to study together A Course in Miracles. And early February, Louis began the program, and whatever, long story short, there are big problems. Louis doesn't fit into an institution so well. The woman running the program, her name is Dorothy, she took an instant dislike to Louis because she had asked him while he was a student of hers there in the CD counselor training program, it would be better if he didn't teach a class on his own. You know, she thought facilitating A Course in Miracles group was teaching a class. And, Louis said to her, well, Course in Miracles is like my church. Would you ask me not to go to church each Sunday? And that put Dorothy off, of course. So she took the first opportunity she could to sit Louis down. I guess after the first quarter of the year training, there was an assessment, and they had used the MMPI, Minnesota Multiphasic Personality Inventory, as one of the assessment tools. And so Dorothy used that test, the results of the MMPI, to tell Louis, it appears to me you're just a square peg trying to fit into a round hole. And I don't see it working. So I'm going to terminate your training program. So once again, Louis put to the test. He's walking down. It was a beautiful spring day. I think it was May, middle of May. A beautiful spring day. Louis had 10 days to move out of his room in this converted motel. And, the first reaction, of course, is very tribal, human. Louis crying like, oh my God, here I am in the middle of nowhere, the heartland of the USA, Minnesota, and I'm being kicked out. So remember, at the soul level, one of Louis' big soul questions was, do I have a home here? He didn't feel at home with his family. He didn't feel at home in the Air Force Academy. For the first time, he felt at home. He spent 10 years, wandering after the meeting with Rena, receiving his destiny. But he had never felt at home in the world. And here he was in Minnesota, far away from Connecticut, Massachusetts, far away from California, in the middle of what appeared to be nowhere. And yet what was starting to grow in Louis because of his teaching training was this idea, kind of a new idea that like home is with me wherever I go, like beginning to feel a sense of home in himself, in his relationship with the divine. And so it occurred to him that it didn't really matter exactly where he was on the face of planet Earth. So he decided he was going to stay. He didn't really know how, but at the very next meeting of the Course in Miracles group, one of the members, Betsy, I believe her name was, and the acquisition editor for Hazelden said, you know, Louis, I've got a project. I feel very confident that the publishing higher ups will accept it. You know, again, that's her job, is to find projects, acquisition editor. So she said, I'm going to pitch to them this idea that you write a book or a booklet series, whichever form seems better, on your integration of A Course in Miracles and the 12 steps. I think they would find that very interesting, very publishable, being that A Course in Miracles was becoming, growing in popularity. And of course, the 12 steps were very popular. So here are two spiritual paths, disciplines that could be integrated. And Louis was the guy to do it, according to Betsy. So she pitched the idea right away. They gave a green light, even offered a small advance, which helped Louis secure an apartment and settle down in St. Croix Falls, Wisconsin, probably about 8-10 miles from Hazelden Center City. And Louis could easily go back and forth on his bicycle, which was his mode of transport, had been for the past 3.5 years. So this process began. Louis hunkered down and began writing. He spent time on his bike each day riding through Interstate Park, a beautiful park, the gorge, the river, St. Croix River running through there. It was really quite beautiful. And Louis felt pretty uplifted, well into his project, his daily routine. Still met with his Course in Miracles group, of course. That was a good anchor for him. And then the phone call came, July 4th, early in the morning. Phone rings and Louis like, ooh, like must have been like 6 a.m. or something. Oh, wow. Like it must be my mom. Who else would call at 6 a.m. on July 4th? And it was Louis's mother. She was crying and said to Louis, your sister Lynn, she hanged herself the day before. She wasn't fully dead. She was in a coma. They cut her down before she was fully dead, just mostly dead. I think her brain suffered severe injury. So she was in a coma on life support. And as Louis's mother's telling him this, the voice, my voice, said to him, pay attention. Okay, so here was the first opportunity for Louis to put this radical teaching, rebirthing of the past 3 years. This was the first time to really put this to the test. Pay attention. Okay, this is the key to everything. I want you to hear this, that being able and willing to hear the voice and respond is key, is everything to your new earth, is everything to your evolution into Homo spiritus, Homo globulus. Is you have a relationship with this voice built on trust. Okay, so here's the first opportunity. Louis is not yet 38. Pay attention. Okay, so Louis had said with his mom, he'd talked with his sister Jody, who was in Seattle, the professor. Maybe they could coordinate their flight, and the 3 children would join with the mom and sit in vigil with our younger sister, Lynn. So shortly after that, Louis is on the phone with Jody in Seattle, and she asks him this very bizarre question: would you consider not coming home? And she went on to explain how she'd always felt like the invisible one, the one that never really sort of had any power in the family. You know, certainly she was having a great career and a good life and all that, but in the family she felt powerless. And she knew if Louis came back, that he would assume the power that he'd always had in relationship with his mother, being always her like best friend and therapist, counselor, whatever. So she said, would you consider not coming home? Let me have an opportunity to participate. And of course, because the voice, my voice, had said to him, pay attention, it was clear that he would say, okay, Jody, I will not come home. And later explained to his mom why, and that was all okay, that Jody and Sandy would sit in vigil with our mother, his mother, with his little sister, Lynn. And so kept up his daily routine, did his writing. He rode his bike in the park. And I remember his experience riding through the park. Because, you know, remember, I'm giving him this big hug through this whole process. And he's feeling this sweetness in him. He's feeling the sweetness flowing through him in the form of his tears. You know, he's become in his early recovery a big crybaby, crying all the time, which is a beautiful thing, letting the feelings flow, feeling so sad for Lynn, but her sadness is his sadness. They grew up as the two younger, they were quite bonded. So sad for, you know, basically the tragedy of her life, that things had never really worked out in the world for her. And he just allowed the grief to flow. And after a few days of this, I want to mention one more thing. There was a favorite movie of Louis, Chariots of Fire, that he had I guess back then it was tape. I guess you'd call it a cassette tape of a film. And anyway, movies were a big thing for Louis. So anyway, in this movie, there's a beautiful scene where the main character, the runner, he has a role as a missionary, but he also has this talent as a runner. And his younger sister, Jenny, she'd never really understood why, you know, like, you should be devoting all of your attention to the missionary, not becoming like a famous person, a runner. You know, he's in the Olympics. And he says to her one day that, you know, Jenny, you know how much I love God, and I love my service to God as a missionary. But I feel God's favor that, you know, God gave me this devotion, but he also made me fast. And when I run, I feel God's pleasure. You know, so the great scenes of him, you know, running. And he always had this crazy look on his face and threw his head back. And anyway, so Jenny didn't approve. She didn't understand. And, you know, he didn't expect her to come to see him run in the Olympics in Paris. But it turns out in this big race where he wins the gold medal, they don't show it until later, but after the race, he's looking up in the crowd and sees his best friend and his brother, and they're cheering, and the brother points to his left, the camera pans over, and there's the sister, Jenny. And she's so happy for her brother. I think she finally understands that he could be a missionary and he could be a great runner, that this was all part of, you know, serving God's will. And so that Louis in St. Croix Falls kept, as part of his vigil, allowing the grief to flow, it would play that movie and that scene over and over and over again, and just crying, crying, crying. Because, you know, like Jenny didn't quite understand her brother's mission of service. Louis's sister Lynn didn't quite understand Louis and his ability to, you know, rise above the wreckage of their childhood. Anyway, it was probably 4 or 5 days into this vigil that in the night Louis was suddenly awakened by me saying, "It's time to write Lynn a letter." So Louis sat down, just basically, it was like automatic writing, just allowed me to write a letter through him, a beautiful letter, just basically giving Lynn this great blessing, saying, you know, Lynn, you have a choice. You can choose to heal and come back into this world, or you can choose to just let go and be free. And either way, you know, your happiness is all that matters. You know, God loves you, God forgives everything, blah, blah, blah. Not sure all the details of the letter, didn't even matter. Louis just knew that he was supposed to send that off in the mail. It would take a day or 2 days from Minnesota to get to Connecticut, where the family was in vigil. And then Louis heard the story of the letter arriving, and the eldest sister, Sandy, she wanted to be the one to read the letter to Lynn. She read it out loud, and there's this aura of peace and light settled over the room. Lynn had been in a very sort of angry coma with clenched fists and a grimace on her face. Her face relaxed, her fingers open. There were these like stigmata marks, you know, red marks in her palms of her hand from her fingernails digging into her skin. She let go and she was free. So this was part of, I mean, when Louis's mom told him this story, very sweet, Louis was very happy for Lynn's freedom. And he said to his mom, just matter of fact, Mom, you know, I want to stand up for Lynn and give her eulogy at a memorial service. And his mom said, of course, this would cause it would seem an irreparable rift between Louis and his 2 older sisters, because again, he was the one that stood up and got all the glory. He held all the power. That was unfortunate, but it was a necessary thing. There was no way that Louis was not, as his younger sister's big brother and best friend, there's no way that he was not the best person to give eulogy. And especially now, because he's under my guidance, this was going to be great. It was going to be amazing. For him, again, not yet 38, able to stand up and demonstrate what he demonstrated that day. Now, it was interesting that Louis's preparation for this was very awkward. You know, he was making notes, and he was an accomplished writer. He thought he could, you know, write something very beautiful or clever or meaningful or heartfelt or whatever. Whatever he tried to write, it was just like obvious that no, it seemed too wooden, too contrived, too whatever. And so again, Louis, this is all about paying attention, about trust. Louis realized that he had to trust. He was going to get up there with no notes. He was going to get up there and just allow it to happen. And it was so interesting that day in the memorial service, a few weeks after, so now we're probably in the early around the beginning of August. In the small town of Simsbury, a suburb of Hartford, Connecticut, you know, this is where the family, you know, grew up, and Louis and his sisters and all that. A small town, probably I think 14,000, 17,000 in that range during the time that they lived there. All of them had been gone but for the father, all of them had moved away, some far away, like Louis in Minnesota, Jody in Seattle, Washington, Sandy in New York and Massachusetts. Anyway, no one really expected much of a turnout for the memorial service. They had planned the event for the smaller chapel, maybe accommodate 50 to 100 people comfortably. And Louis and the family, they were waiting in the room they always have reserved for family to sit during a memorial service, or before the memorial service, while all the guests are coming in and the room is being set up. About 10 minutes before the service was supposed to begin, someone came in and gave the minister in charge this information. She told the family, well, there's a much bigger turnout than we expected, so we're going to have to move the service to the main sanctuary. So that took another 15, 20 minutes, move all the flowers, move all the people. Gave Louis more time to sit there just in a state of very high anxiety. It was so sweet when he actually, it was his time after a piece of music to go up to the altar, the podium, to give the talk. He was shaking so badly. He tried to get a cup of water to his mouth, but he's shaking so badly he couldn't take a sip of water. So he just took a breath and he decided to take 15 seconds, maybe 30 seconds, and just sort of scan the audience. And he sees the close family in the front. He sees his father crying. He sees his uncle there crying, and his heart just opened wide. And as his heart opened wide, he became calm. And he's scanning again the audience. This probably took 10 seconds, but it seemed like longer to Louis. But he sees all, he can recognize so many faces. These are individuals he hadn't seen in 20 years, more or less, but high school friends, neighborhood kids, now all grown up, and teachers, and now there's some old people. It was very fascinating. He basically just had this recognition that his whole world, his whole past, was being represented in this room. Like, again, wow, what an opportunity to speak this truth to what represented his past. This world that he had chosen to leave to find greater life, greater love, the Thomas Wolfe quote. Then he finally sees in the back row the same representation of Jesus that he'd seen in the helicopter dream, looked like Robert Conrad. And he's in the back row just giving like thumbs up, like, you're going to be great. I don't know if Louis almost chuckled, but I know he just felt so happy and so at peace. And he gave this talk. He gave this talk that was amazing, even to him. I think even as it was coming through him, like he was in a trance. Like, remember that death, rebirth trance thing where he was remembering his birth, his face was being crushed. It's like when you're in this rarefied air, okay, the hush of heaven holds my heart today. You're in this rarefied space and you're able to operate. I mean, your body is operating. He was talking, but he was aware that it wasn't him at all. He could actually be a spectator like everyone else in the audience. It's like, wow. The words coming through him were amazing. He was able to translate the tragedy of Lynn's death. Remember, the Course in Miracles line that's so great. The end of the world is not its destruction, but its translation into heaven. So Lynn's death was not evidence of destruction, but evidence of translation into heaven, into beauty, light, love. It was a celebration. The talk he was giving was a talk of celebration, of thanksgiving, not of regret, not of tragedy, not of anything negative at all. It's kind of like Lynn's life represented a level of honesty that's very rare in this world. Because again, most people are so defended with their ego. So the pain, the suffering, whatever but in general, you could say, I would say to you as Sun King, that if you really look closely at a tragic death, there's something beautiful in that tragedy. And so this is what Louis was speaking to this day, the beauty within. It doesn't mean that the appearance of, tragedy, the destruction of a body, a life, didn't happen. But inside, if you look closer, there's a great film that Louis loved, perhaps his very favorite film, called American Beauty. And in this movie, Kevin Spacey says at the very beginning, by the end of this year, I'll be dead. Okay, so we accept. Some people were thinking there's going to be a shift, a happy ending, but no, he said truly that he knew, or he was talking from his higher self, saying, watch what happens, watch unfolds. By the end of this film, I'll be dead. But that's not the story. The story is the freedom that he finds, the beauty that he finds, American Beauty. This is a film about beauty. It's an amazing film. So like that tragedy that happens to Kevin Spacey's character in American Beauty, the tragedy of suicide happened to Louis' younger sister, Lynn. But it represented honesty, beauty, truth, love, light. Okay, and a little tale to this story that would actually happen the next spring at Easter. Louis would go back to Hope Church in Amherst, Massachusetts. He knew that he just had this thing again, this knowing. It's like Louis so plugged in now. He's so tuned in, right? Get tuned. See the shirt? Get tuned. Louis so tuned in now to me, to his higher self, to his destiny, all the pieces. Like there's never going to be any accidents, nothing that will happen from this point on in Louis' story, in his life, will be accidental, will be a mistake, will be like a waste of time or a misdirection or whatever. And actually come to realize that there never was, but things become so much more efficient when you're paying attention, okay? The pieces of the puzzle all come together, all for Louis' benefit. This is all for Louis' benefit, which in the end is for your benefit. I mean, Louis being groomed to be this voice for God, for his higher self, for Sun King. It's all the same thing. Okay, so part of this grooming is for Easter Sunday, this return to the womb. Remember, Amherst was the beginning of his true life, the true birth that he took as Sun King, as the one who would represent God, the unmanifested, eternity, taking the name of Sun King to describe that voice, okay? And of Course in Miracles is just the voice for God, the voice for God. And it's very clear in the teaching. I was just looking at some of the teacher's manual material this morning. I mean, it's very clear that anyone who answers this voice will eventually become a channel, right? Through you is ushered in a world unseen, unheard, yet truly there. Each of us that answers this call will become that, will become this conduit, a perfect conduit for eternity to be represented in the world of time and space. Okay, it's the translation of the world into heaven. Okay, so when Louis had been living in Amherst, he was going to a Unity Universalist church, very dry, very intellectual, very boring. He liked the connection there that he had with some people as part of his new family that he was finding, a new sense of home. But he heard about this place called Hope Church, and Carlos and Crystal Anderson, who were the co-ministers of this church. The father had been this Baptist minister. So it was a Baptist church that had gone through this transformation into a New Age Course in Miracles based church, an integration of the best of both. So there was still a lot of the hallelujah, giving testimony. Most of the congregation was Black. But Louis found a real amazing home there and a real amazing brother in Carlos. So Carlos had lost in the past year a brother, and his father had passed. So he was going to give this talk on Easter Sunday, basically called Friends in High Places, about our relationship with the divine, our relationship with those who have dropped the body, and they become our angelic friends in high places. So Louis knew he needed to be there. It was a remarkable talk, and he had said to Carlos beforehand, Carlos knew about his sister passing also in the previous year. And so basically Louis just said to Carlos, they had become very close friends over time. And he said, I want to give testimony. And, I'll be ready. So please, let me. It was obvious to Carlos that Louis was very ready. During his talk, Louis was starting to be very agitated. In fact, he knew he had a couple accomplices that sat on either side of him. He asked them to kind of help him, anchor him, like hold his hands and help him sort of stay in his body, because he just knew that in this talk he was going to start vibrating at such a high level that it would be as if he was going to have a stroke or just explode. The body couldn't contain this level of energy, which again, this is an experience that many of you might have. Okay, it's certainly an experience you're going to have when you drop your body. You're going to enter this vibrational reality that is so powerful that, of course, you can't stay in your body. You're dropping your body. But so imagine having this experience while staying fully alive in the body. It's a rare thing. It's lucky that Louis was only still just 38 years old, that his heart was strong enough to withstand this, because it was so remarkable. The level of energy that was vibrating through. And in fact, when Carlos finished talking and Louis just kind of jumped up out of his seat, Carlos said that there were these blue flames, blue sparks coming off each of his fingertips. It was so much energy that built up. It just needed to be released. And the blue energy of the spectrum is a very high level energy, very close to white, pure. So he just popped up and just said, something like, the Christ is alive in me today, or something like that, because it was just an affirmation of what was true. And during Carlos's talk, Louis had this amazing hallucination, vision, because Jesus used to come to Louis sometimes when he was in prayer, crying, and Louis he would have this vision of this entity, which he came to realize again was Jesus, would come and lift him up by his left armpit and walk him to this precipice. And he would just, without words, extend his right arm, pointing to the horizon while he held Louis and say, like, this is our destiny together. This is our work ahead of us. And then he would step off the precipice with Louis, and they would, fly. This was always that time that was called flying lessons. So during Carlos's talk, Louis is going into this high state of reverie. So of course, an hallucination like that would be expected. And of course he had it. The same thing, because his eyes were closed, Jesus lifting him up and walking him to the precipice. But instead of pointing straight out, he pointed to Louis's other side. Look over there. And Louis turned his head and he saw Lynn in her magnificence, in her angelic form. You could basically see features of her face that made it clear that it was her, but she was an energy body. She wasn't really in the body. Her hair was flowing, and it was just this amazing thing. So he basically said, okay, this is her true self that now she's fully returned to. She's no longer tethered at all to the world of sorrow. So that was the end of the story, okay, about pay attention, what's really going on. If you don't think you're a pilot like me, you don't know shit from Shinola. The whole package, was more or less complete. That Louis had received the training. He was sort of accepted, even though he had still take baby steps. He still had work to do as far as cleaning out his karmic locker. We'll get to that next time. But it's like this was complete. It was solidified. Louis was never going to go backwards ever again. It was done. Okay, so it's really important to hear this message that as you answer the call, you will be given, like Louis was, the opportunities to put the teaching to the test. There's a lot of people that study spiritual things, but they're not really ready or willing to receive the message. They want to be seekers, they don't want to be finders. Okay, so this is something where, again, there's the split in the road. Those who will remain seekers all of their life, never really finding, never receiving the message. Because if you receive the message, everything changes. Everything changes. The whole life, the whole world, everything changes. We'll get to that more as we go along. Pay attention, listen. I love you.